Welcome to the Blue Security Podcast, a weekly podcast for information security defenders, where we bring you discussions on best practices, tools, and implementation for enterprise security. Now, here are your hosts for today's show, Andy Jha and Adam Brewer.
Welcome to this week's episode of the Blue Security Podcast. I'm Andy, your host.
I'm Adam, your co-host.
You may have noticed we are changing our schedule just slightly. We used to record on Friday nights. We're now going to record on Sunday nights. And we used to release our episodes late Sunday night, but we're going to shift that more to Monday mornings now. So expect that going forward to be the schedule. It's nothing that's going to be game-changing, but we're just changing it up because this works better for both me and Adam. Mm-hmm. This week, we're going to go over some news that has been happening, just doing a little bit of catch up. Microsoft Defender Vulnerability Management, which was something we've talked about in the past. It was in public preview in September of 2022, and then it went to general availability or GA as of March 1st this year. And this is a pretty cool new add-on that you can have for your security program. So if you are a Microsoft Defender P2 customer, which usually is for your endpoints, or you have Defender for Servers P1, you get vulnerability management capabilities included. And those are things like device discovery, inventory, configuration assessments, risk-based prioritization, which will take like the vulnerabilities and then prioritize them by risk of which ones are most risky to your organization for you to prioritize where you want to do your remediation and spend your time. You have remediation tracking, and then of course software inventory and usage. So you can tell what software is being installed on those endpoints or servers, and then how it's being used, and if that software is vulnerable. With the Defender Vulnerability Management add-on for endpoints, or Defender for Cloud, or Defender for Servers P2, which is for servers, or there's also a standalone licensing that you can get, you add on additional capabilities, like the ability to block vulnerable applications. So when you see those vulnerable software in the first part, you now have the ability to just straight up block them right from the security portal. You can also evaluate your browser extensions, digital certificate assessment, which can look at whether or not your certificates are expired or about to expire, if the key size is less than 2048 bits, if it's signed with a weak signature algorithm, or if it's self-signed. You have network share analysis, like the ability to look at the permissions at the network shares to see if they're set to like everyone, or if there's folder enumerations for the shares. Hardware and firmware assessments, like looking at processor and BIOS inventory and then gathering information about missing security updates for that. And then finally, authenticated scans for Windows. Now, if you have been using Defender for Endpoint P2 and the vulnerability management capabilities included with that, you can have a scanner that will then use Defender for Endpoint agents along the same network to do a scan of, say, firewalls like Cisco or Palo Alto over a set IP address range. But with this add-on, this new capability, you get the ability to add on authenticated scans. So you can have a GMSA credential that you would then set within the vulnerability management portal, and it can do a credentialed scan of Windows operating systems. So that's kind of an overview. This went GA and is now available. So a lot of interesting things here. Really good add-on in my opinion.
I'm going to go over the licensing again just because it's a little confusing, and I know from talking to customers, they've had a little challenge grasping this. So just to try to make this as clear as possible, Microsoft, which again is our employer, as we like to remind folks in every show, ships a set of vulnerability management capabilities if you're already using the EDR capabilities. If you're licensed for EDR is kind of the way to know that, because otherwise it gets confusing when you say, well, Defender for Endpoint Plan 2 or Defender for Server Plan 1. You're like, wait, one's P1, one's P2. I don't get it. The easier way is to know if you're licensed for EDR, then you're licensed for that base set of vulnerability management capabilities as well. We have created an additional set of capabilities that are procured either as an add-on for those. For an add-on for endpoints, you can step up to the Plan 2 for servers, or you can just buy it by itself as well. So there's different ways to get it, and you can talk to your Microsoft account team about that. But just want to be clear, nothing has been removed from what has shipped for many years now with Defender for Endpoint or Defender for Server. As far as that base set of vulnerability management capabilities, this is above and beyond that. And some pretty cool stuff in here. I think definitely very helpful for organizations to have visibility into things like weak certificates or network shares with maybe undesirable configuration, or knowing that you're missing a firmware update for your hardware. Those are all really useful things to know as well. So definitely something you can check out. There is a trial available if it's something you're interested in as well. So talk to your Microsoft account team for more, but just something to be aware of. Again, and another place where, and you're seeing this a lot lately, Microsoft launching new capabilities above and beyond what ships, for example, in E5. And those are for customers who need them, and you can kind of pick and choose what the right ones are for you.
So another thing that I wanted to just chat about is I saw a tweet from Nicole Perroth, who is a cybersecurity journalist. If you've been on Twitter before or have read some of her articles, she's pretty well known within the cybersecurity community as a well-vetted journalist. And she had a tweet that talked about a Wall Street Journal article that was titled "CIOs Build New Bonds with CISOs." And the gist of that article was that cybersecurity leaders are being increasingly asked to communicate directly with board members and business leaders because, you know, there's new threats and everything that the board wants to hear about. Maybe they hear some news and they want to know if that company is protected. And that adds some complexities between some CIOs and CISOs because now they're kind of facing like dividing lines between their responsibilities. And I always thought it was really interesting where the reporting structure is for CISOs. And we've talked about that before, Adam, where sometimes CISOs have been kind of the redheaded stepchild in the C-suite. They haven't really been considered a true C-suite, person. And that sometimes they report to a CIO or the CFO or whatever. And that really waters down their pull when it comes to deploying certain programs or really making security a priority. And now with some of the new SEC guidance that's coming out, which we're going to talk about in just a minute, now especially publicly traded companies need to start paying attention to cybersecurity because it's going to be reportable up to the SEC.
It's definitely a litmus test to where an organization is in their maturity of IT and information security based on the reporting structure for those individuals, as you point out. And I have noticed pretty consistently a lack of maturity in IT when the CIO is not at this point considered a true equal standing member of the C-suite, on par with the CFO or the COO. They absolutely should be. And I don't think that should really even be a controversial take anymore, because IT is so fundamental to the operations of the company, but is a distinct practice from operations in almost every company. So that to me is still a red flag to this day. And I get, like, we've created a lot of CXO roles in recent years: chief people officer, chief diversity officer, and the list goes on. And not all of them can report directly to the CEO. I get that. I get that sometimes becomes too hairy. Only so many people can report to Satya Nadella as an example. But at this point, my goodness, if that's not one of them, that's interesting to me. And CISO, again, like there's a ton of different reporting structures you see out there. I like it at least when they don't report to the CIO, although that's not the worst. I don't know what the worst is, but it definitely speaks to each organization and where their priorities lie. I would love to see the CISO literally be a member of the C-suite side by side with the CIO. I'd love to see both of them report to the CEO. I'm biased, but I think today every organization needs to be an information security organization in the long term, because those risks are only going to become more and more and more prevalent. Maybe report to the chief risk officer or something. I don't know, but it's definitely, and then how you manage that role, I think, is an interesting challenge as well, how you manage that relationship. Because I have worked places where there has felt like a push and pull between information security and the broader IT strategy. They have not felt in lockstep. And no CEO wants to be like the arbiter of disagreement between the two. So there needs to be some sort of alignment, which is why sometimes it helps just to have CISO report to CIO. But either way, I see this as something that's going to be revisited at organizations, not to do too much foreshadowing, but I think on the next two items we're going to discuss is going to lead organizations to say, is this the right approach? Do we need to change it? And I think some of these SEC proposals are the reason why, amongst other things, of course.
Yeah, there's two of them that have recently been updated, one on March 9th and the other one on March 15th. And the first proposed amendment would require some things like reporting about security incidents, periodic reporting to update previous incidents. It also would require the registrar's board of directors oversight of security risk and management roles in assessing like their expertise. So if they have any expertise on the board of directors. So there's a lot of, I think there's a lot of positives. Nicole Perroth said, this is a big plus, a lot of opportunity to bring on more CISOs onto the boards. And like some companies are creating like new cybersecurity committees to oversee cybersecurity. So if you're a publicly traded company, I think this is definitely something to keep an eye on. And some other things, this proposal on March 15th said that all market entities would be required to implement policies and procedures that are reasonably designed to address their cybersecurity risk and at least annually review and assess design and effectiveness of their cybersecurity policies and procedures, including whether they reflect changes in cybersecurity risk over the time period covered by the review. So a lot of scrutiny, I would say, from the SEC if you are a publicly traded company, and this is something definitely to pay attention to, because even if you're not, you're a private company, this is still something that can roll down to you as well, just in the market flow, I think, and the trends of where the companies are going. So a lot of good things here.
I just got done reading The Big Short by Michael Lewis, which, okay, I'm 13 years late to reading it. I think that came out in 2010 or 2011, but I had seen movie clips keep popping up from the movie, and I loved the movie, thought it was great. I had never read the book. And so I was going to do a lot of flying on an airplane and needed a new book to buy. So I bought it and read it. And one of the major themes that comes out in the book was how little leadership of these organizations understood their risk, the actual risk they were undertaking, and then by proxy, how little investors in those organizations understood their risk. And so being with that fresh in mind, like this to me, and of course, intersecting with my current role, this to me is no brainer, especially kind of the first one you were talking about, which would require annual reporting on cybersecurity posture, follow-up reporting on past cybersecurity incidents, reporting on your just everything related to it, and making sure that that's a requirement. Because I think back to baseball had a major problem with people cheating and using steroids so they could hit more home runs. And there's a certain group of people that walk around and say, well, you never said that was against the rules, even though that was implicitly understood. So the second proposal you talked about, which kind of just laid out like they should be required to take reasonable, steps to protect themselves against cybersecurity. They should do annual reviews of it. The board should have oversight of it. That all sounds like, yeah, almost everyone's doing that today. But sometimes it's helpful just to put that in writing so it's not an assumption. It is a law, or it is a requirement now that if you're a publicly traded company, there is an SEC rule that says thou shalt have a cybersecurity practice, and thou shalt analyze it annually, and thou shalt report on it to your shareholders and to the public at large. Because guess what happened last time? A whole bunch of organizations didn't understand their risk and almost went out of business. We gave them a big fat loan to help them recover because they didn't understand their own business and their own risks. So really topical for me right now based on what I just read, but gosh, I love this so much. I don't see any of this, by the way, because this is when you generally get people come out of the woodwork and say, oh, this is too much regulatory burden. This is onerous. This is going to cost money and delay, blah, 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 blah. None of this is onerous. Read through this. This is like so basic. To me, part of this, the second one, my initial take was, again, like everybody's already doing this, but having a rule on the record is still helpful. And there are some organizations that probably aren't. And yes, this might be a little onerous to them, but if you have passed the bar of being publicly traded, which does not happen for small mom and pop companies, that's past the burden of it being onerous anyway, in my mind. So I am very, very, very in support of both of these proposals. I think they're fantastic.
The final thing that I just wanted to chat about real quick is last week, or maybe 2 weeks ago, on March 16th, Microsoft announced a new capability called Microsoft 365 Copilot. And there was a whole announcement about it. Satya Nadella did a nice video about it. But this was really, really neat. And it's one of those things that kind of revolutionizes the way that we work. And I know it doesn't have a ton to do with cybersecurity, but it's kind of neat and talks about the large language models like ChatGPT that we had a whole conversation about a few weeks ago. Mm-hmm. But what Microsoft Copilot does is it combines these large language models with the data of Microsoft Graph, like all of your calendars and emails and documents and meetings and chats, and it turns it into a really powerful productivity tool. And you can do things within the Microsoft suite like Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Teams, all of that. And there's going to be a little area for Copilot where you can give it commands or just natural things like telling it to do something for you. Very similar to ChatGPT, kind of, where you can ask it a question just in natural language instead of just a search. But a couple examples that were in the blog, like in Word, you can give it a command like draft a 2-page project proposal based on the data from, blank document or a spreadsheet. And then it will pull those two things together and then draft a proposal. I was really interested in the PowerPoint one because I hate creating PowerPoint slides. Mm-hmm. So in PowerPoint, you can do commands like create a 5-slide presentation based on a Word document and include relevant stock photos, or consolidate this presentation into a 3-slide summary. That is phenomenal because a lot of the slideshows that I get for, ones I present to customers they're like 60 slides long. They're ridiculous. The marketing creates these like massive slideshows. So I'm interested to see how this is going to work, because I will definitely take one of those presentations and do this specific command, consolidate it into 3-slide summary. Cool. Or reformat these 3 bullets into 3 columns with each a picture. Like, these are really cool. Just, I need you to do something for me and just go and do it instead of having you manually do it. And so to get access to this, it's really not for most people right now. Microsoft is testing 365 with 20 customers, including 8 in Fortune 500 enterprises. And so they're going to be expanding the previews more broadly in the next coming months. But, this is something to look forward to for sure. And then so it's not available like to me and you, Adam, like today, or to our listeners, but it will be. And I'm very excited for when it comes out, because I want to try it right away.
We will definitely be testing it internally, hopefully soonish, it sounds like. This is awesome. I think really, when you think of large language models, and I've been listening to Windows Weekly a lot lately, and it's fair to say that all 3 hosts of the show, Leo Laporte, Richard Campbell, Paul Thurrott, have all been fairly pessimistic, to put it mildly, about some of the advances in artificial intelligence recently. Very jaded, which for some of them is very on brand. However, one thing they do point out is that we're in this kind of Gartner hype curve right now, and we're on the big upswing when we're trying to get a grasp on what can these tools actually do and not do. And I find it really helpful to use phrases like large language model, because I think that grounds us that like this isn't coherent, it's not sentient, it can't reason. What it really is good at ultimately is it's good at generating very natural sounding language. They're really good at that because they've ingested all of this information and they've learned statistically how English sentences are written. They're just really advanced versions of essentially like the suggestions above your keyboard, like on your iPhone that suggest the next word. It's like a super sophisticated version of that. So if you think of, okay, what are they good at? They're really good at generating content, generative AI. You may have heard that phrase as well. So what is the best possible use case for this? It's this. It's the Microsoft Office suite being able to generate documents based on some sort of input. And I love the branding here too. And again, you know who signs our paychecks, but I think Copilot really clearly explains, like, this isn't going to do it all the way for you. This is going to get you started. This is going to get you going. It's going to create a PowerPoint. It's probably not going to be perfect and ready to go right away, but it's going to help you go, oh, okay, yeah, I like how this is formatted. Let me tweak this and do that, and this will be ready to go. Well, that's awesome. That helps kind of augment your human ingenuity. So I think that's really cool. I think this is a great use case for it. So let me pull this back, though, and make this relevant to our listeners. Because, of course, as soon as this was announced, customers have had a couple of questions. Number one, when can I get my hands on it? Number two, what are the privacy and data security concerns I should be thinking about? And obviously, there's going to be more detail to come over time. We'll probably dive deeper into architectural model as we get closer to public preview and general availability. But we've made a couple of statements right away. And I can share these with folks on the show, our listeners as well. Number one is that the way these models are going to work, and let me take a step back. So when you think of a multi-tenant environment like a Microsoft 365, one of the most fundamental concerns about it is that your organization's data is isolated from another organization's, that there is that hard boundary that things cannot cross, like data in SharePoint Online or data in Exchange Online. And obviously, we're very good at that and been doing that for a very long time. And so when you have these individual tenants, one thing that runs in all of them is something called the Microsoft Graph. And the Microsoft Graph is really this almost data lake of data of all the interactions between the users in your environment. When they send email, who they send email to, who they collaborate with, who they share files with in OneDrive and SharePoint, what teams are they a member of. And that creates this graph of information about how your organization works. And then there's a whole bunch of different capabilities in Microsoft 365 that leverage that. You think of one of the first examples was Delve back in the day. More recently, something like Viva Insights that can give you insights into how you work and how you work with others. And then there's even a management view that is not a thing for spying, by the way, totally side note, but just kind of collects all of that information and rolls it up to help understand, hey, your people are working on the weekends a lot. Maybe that's something you should address or stuff like that. That said, now you kind of move into, okay, Copilot. So of course there's going to be an underlying large language model that exists in the Microsoft cloud. Just first point out of the gate, this is not just the ChatGPT public instance that runs on openai.org that anyone can access. It's a bespoke large language model. They're specifically saying it is not ChatGPT. It's a bespoke large language model that runs in the M365 cloud. That's point one. Now that is accessible across multiple tenants, right? Then remember how I was explaining in your individual org's tenant, you have your instance of the Microsoft 365 graph. That graph data will be used to enrich that large language model, but that will never cross your tenant boundaries. That won't leave, that doesn't intermingle. And that data, by the way, is not used to go back and train the underlying model. So your company's data is not used to train that large language model across M365. Super duper clear on that. That's not how it works. So you don't have to worry about if you're Dunkin' Donuts that you may accidentally expose your recipe data to Starbucks or whatever. That's not how it works. However, it will be enriched with your org data at your level. So yes, Copilot might know things about your organization and can make suggestions. It might know I work with Andy Jaw a lot and maybe suggest him in the context of a presentation as an example. So that's something really, really great to know. It respects all of the existing data boundaries that exist in M365. So there's really shouldn't be any concern there. I get the devil's in the details, and there'll probably be more discussions about architecture, again, closer to launch. But one thing all our listeners can know today, there isn't going to be any training data that feeds back into the overall large language model from your environment, from your org. That all said, the other thing to know, and I know Microsoft has a spotty history with this in the past, but this will not be enabled by default for anyone. Your organization will have to opt in and turn this on. So we're not turning this on for you. And Microsoft has not come out and said what the licensing for this is going to look like, but has said you will need a base of like an Microsoft 365 E3 or E5 to be eligible to get this. So read into that what you will. No statements on licensing or cost or anything else, but the suggestion has been it's not going to be baked into E3 or E5 as is as well. So another reason it's not going to get turned on by default, unless you buy it, you don't own it. It sounds like the case. Again, nothing official on that. So this is just kind of reading the tea leaves and what has been announced to date. So I think for our folks, our listeners who say, hey, this is awesome, I'm concerned about security, which just means you're doing your job. The initial reporting sounds like we should be okay there. Obviously, I know in my world, selling Microsoft security, if we stopped respecting that vital importance of multi-tenancy, that everyone's tenant has strong data isolation, that really breaks down the whole perception of the platform as a whole. And so that's not something we'd be willing to compromise on down the road. And I think that's why we've come out so strongly articulating some of these messages with Copilot.
Well said, Adam. That's all we had for this week. That's our show. Thanks for watching and listening as always. Our contact information will be in the show notes if you have any questions or topics you want us to talk about in the future. Thanks, and we'll talk to you guys next week.
Thank you for listening to the Blue Security Podcast. Please check out the show notes, catch up on episodes you may have missed, and subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. Find Andy on Twitter @AJaw0 and Adam @AJ Brewer. See you at our next episode.